The fall-off of the Winnipeg Jets and the New York Rangers this week has to be studied, and we will be doing just that in today's class, where we break down the latest tier list of all 32 NHL teams. And we'll start at the bottom, which used to be the Ass tier, but is now the Perpetual Darkness tier. It includes the Chicago Blackhawks, San Jose Sharks, Anaheim Ducks, Columbus Blue Jackets, and Montreal Canadiens. It's not enough to call these teams ass, they are just all perpetual losers. I don't see any way that they are going to get out of it, at least this year. If there was any one team that I could think maybe is squinting to see light, it would be the San Jose Sharks. And the Columbus Blue Jackets, I'll admit, have been very feisty of late, but I still think all of these teams are going to end up at the bottom of the standings. Above them, though, in their own tier is the most pathetic squad in the NHL, the Nashville Predators. Another really bad week on a trip through Canada where they went 0-3, a loss to Toronto, not bad, but losing to Montreal and Ottawa is really earning their spot in the pathetic tier. Nashville, now 8 games under 500, and it seems like it's only a matter of time before the fire sale begins and some firings commence. Up above them, in the bad and stupid tier, just 3 teams, the Detroit Red Wings, Philadelphia Flyers, and Buffalo Sabres. All of these teams are just good enough to not be considered in perpetual darkness, and the Flyers in particular have had some moments of being really feisty, but I don't see any of these teams being really that competitive or in the hunt come playoff time. But another team in their own tier are the Ottawa Senators, and just like me to my father, they're huge disappointments. I had such high hopes coming into this season for the Ottawa Senators. I thought that they were going to finally make the leap into the playoffs and shake things up in the Atlantic Division, but alas, they have been just as disappointing as ever. Their goaltending still sucks. They did have a pretty good week last week, going 2-1, but the wins were over Detroit and Nashville, not exactly the best teams, and they lost to the New York Islanders, who aren't that great. Ottawa's a game under 500 now, and they are just as underwhelming and disappointing as they have been the last few years to me and to their fans. Jumping up into the mid-tier, we have the aforementioned Islanders, Pittsburgh Penguins, St. Louis Blues, Utah Hockey Club, and the biggest risers of the week, the Seattle Kraken. The Kraken had a really tough go of it last week, going against Carolina, the Islanders, New Jersey Devils, and New York Rangers all on the road, and they took 3 out of 4 of those games. The win over Carolina is particularly impressive, as is the win over the New York Rangers, even though they are falling off of a cliff. And their one loss by a goal to the New Jersey Devils is still pretty solid, so impressive week for the Kraken, who are back at 500. And speaking of those Rangers, they are now down in their own tier, the riches to rags tier, as they were one of the biggest droppers of the entire week. The only reason they weren't the biggest dropper of the week is because they did manage to get that 4-2 win over the Pittsburgh Penguins on Friday, but then losing to Seattle and Chicago, that last one being a particularly bad loss for the Rags, is why they have dropped so far. They are now only 2 games over 500, and there are a lot of questions being asked about what this team's going to do. They already traded Jacob Trouba. Are they going to move on from Pierre Laviolette? Are they going to trade a guy like Chris Kreider or Mika Zibanejad? There's not a whole lot more levers that Chris Drury can pull, and the ones that he's pulled so far don't seem to have worked at all. But above them, another team in their own tier, the Calgary Flames, are a team that I think is worse than we think. They're only 3 games over 500, and last week they had a pretty easy schedule. They beat Columbus, lost to St. Louis in overtime, and then got trounced by the Dallas Stars. So they went 500. It was not a particularly bad week for them, but this is a team that is in the middle of the pack when it comes to expected goal ratio. They're getting bailed out a lot by their star rookie goalie Dustin Wolf, so I'm still not fully bought in on the Calgary Flames just yet. Above them, we have a very crowded contenders tier that includes the Vancouver Canucks, Boston Bruins, rising LA Kings, Colorado Avalanche, the biggest fallers, the Winnipeg Jets, and the Florida Panthers. We'll start off this tier talking about the Kings, who had a really good week. Only 2 games, but they were against Dallas and Minnesota, and they won them both. They're now 8 games over 500. They're one of the better teams in the Western Conference, and they're the best defensive team in the NHL with the lowest expected goals against on the year. Now, on the other hand, the Winnipeg Jets, it has been a miraculous shot to the top, but it's going to be an even harder fall back down to earth. This week might not look too bad on the surface. They went 2-2, but the problem is this is a particularly easy schedule for a team that fancy themselves at the top of the NHL. Losses to St. Louis and Columbus by identical 4-1 scores is not particularly impressive, and their wins against Buffalo in overtime and Chicago by only 2 goals, not really impressing me. The good news is that this skid has seemed to come at a soft part of their schedule. They're going to be playing San Jose, Anaheim, and Montreal later in the week and next week, but the Jets have got to turn this skid around or they are going to be in danger of falling even further down this list. Then we have 3 teams that I think are better than most people are giving them credit for: the Toronto Maple Leafs, Dallas Stars, and Edmonton Oilers. None of these teams are at the top of the standings, but the underlying analytics look good for all of them, and I just believe from a talent perspective, these are some of the best teams in the NHL, Well, if you were to ask me which team I would be betting on outside of maybe the top 4 or 5 in the standings, these would be my 3 teams. But they are not in the elite tier, which is now very expansive because honestly, there's not a whole lot of separation between these 6 teams. The Vegas Golden Knights, Tampa Bay Lightning, Carolina Hurricanes, Minnesota Wild, Washington Capitals, and New Jersey Devils. Now, the Golden Knights had a particularly good week. They won all 3 games, which included matches against Edmonton and Dallas. I am a bit concerned about their underlying analytics, but they're 4th in the league in points, and they're coming off of a very strong week, so it was really hard for me to keep them out of the elite tier. On the other side, the Carolina Hurricanes took a bit of a tumble this week. They only won 1 of their 3 games this week, that being against Colorado, and losing to teams like Seattle and the Islanders. Not great for a team that figures to be one of the elites in the NHL this year.